Okay, so website structure is obviously one of the most important aspects of any nonprofit's website, but it is also notoriously difficult to get right. And before we start kind of peeling back the layers of that onion, we want to start out with something a little bit different here today. So imagine this, right? You can close your eyes or you can keep your eyes open, totally up to you. But just imagine that you are describing a dream vacation to a travel agent of the future. And, you know, they basically say they've got the spot for you. And because it's the future, you're just instantly teleported to the middle of a new place that you've never been before. And it's beautiful. But when you look around, you realize you can't make sense of it, right? Like the signs are all in a language that you don't understand, and you're really hungry, but all you see are museums and parks. There's no restaurants anywhere inside. And as you look around, you start to notice everyone else seems just as confused as you are. And everyone's just kind of wandering around, knocking on doors, trying to find what they're looking for. And generally, everyone looks pretty grumpy. You think to yourself, if only I had a map in a language that I understand, right? And if you stick around long enough, you could probably wander around and find what you need, but you're hungry, you're getting tired. So instead of wandering around aimlessly, you decide to leave and teleport back and try somewhere else. When your website structure isn't clear for visitors, this is exactly what they experience. Eh, Visitors expect to find what they're looking for quickly and easily. And when they can't, most folks will not wander around aimlessly knocking on doors. Like they'll just teleport back, they'll just leave your website. And we see it all the time. It's really normal for websites to evolve over time. New pages are created here, things change slowly over time, but those changes start to sort of pile up. And what used to be a really well-organized site starts to feel really confusing and really overwhelming for visitors. And as updates are tacked on and additions are made, it leaves the website as what we call a Frankensite, where things are just kind of bolted together and don't end up feeling super streamlined anymore. So today we're going to break down the 4 easiest, most sort of impactful ways for you to improve your website structure, so your site stays easy to navigate and as effective as possible. And as we dive in, we're just going to take a minute to get clear on the language and the terminology that we'll be using. And that's going to allow us to make this whole process just more precise as we go through it. So your website is made up of pages, right? And your structure is the way that those pages are named and organized. You might also hear this called a sitemap, or even information architecture is a really fancy way, but basically they're all referring to the same general thing. And I will say we have a resource on our website that talks about website terminology, and we'll be sure to share that so that you have it handy. But one of the most important things we're going to cover here is the primary navigation. This is essentially the main menu that helps visitors find their way around your website. And these pages in the primary navigation serve as the foundation of your website structure. Now, the secondary navigation is this additional menu that complements the primary navigation. It might be made up of buttons, it might be made up of links, depending on your website design. And oftentimes these are key action items like donate or contact us that you want to make sure are really easy for visitors to find on most every page of your website. This one's pretty self-explanatory. A drop-down menu refers to the additional pages that drop down or expand when you hover over an item in the primary navigation. So these are sort of just the pages within that section of the website. And then your website might have a sidebar that appears on internal pages, again, depending on the design. Oftentimes, you'll see a sidebar navigation here, and this just allows visitors to easily navigate to related content within that section of the site that they're currently viewing. All right. The next few all kind of fit together here, but you might hear pages referred to as parent, child, and grandchild pages. It's a way to describe their relationship to one another using family tree terminology. So, for example, here our parent page is get involved, which can be highlighted there. And volunteer opportunities is a child page of get involved. And then the other child pages under get involved or donate, events, annual conference, and awareness month. And you can see it there in the drop down menu. You can see it in the sidebar navigation. And then one time volunteer opportunities is a grandchild page of get involved, and it's a child page of volunteer opportunities. So again, just think of it like a family tree, and then each subpage is essentially a new generation in that tree. And then just kind of use the corresponding language to describe how pages are related to one another. It's just like a sort of like quick, easy way to describe the relationships of pages to one another. So I know it's a lot of terminology. Again, Nikki shared that link in the chat that covers all these and actually a lot more terms. But those are all the terms we'll really need today to make sure that we're able to nail our website structure. So now that we have that sort of shared foundation, what does your website structure actually have to do? It's actually pretty straightforward. A good website structure makes it easy for your visitors to find what they're looking for. That's really it. That's its whole job. We want to make your content as easy for visitors to find as we possibly can. And good structure will make it easy for your audience to find what they're looking for, regardless of things like where on your website they originally land, what problem that they're trying to solve, or how much context and background knowledge they're bringing with them to your website. So again, just a good structure is going to make it easy for your visitors to find what they're looking for, no matter what, really. Your visitors should be able to quickly understand generally where they are within your website and how to get where they want to be. And, the way that your pages are named and how they're organized are all going to play a major role in making your content as easy to find as we possibly can. And then together they act as sort of that map that we talked about for visitors who have teleported in. And when it's done well, it should really help folks navigate through your site to find the information that they need without getting frustrated or confused, hitting a dead end, and ultimately leaving. But how do you know if your structure is actually hitting the mark? Especially when you're in the weeds of your work, it can be really hard to know if your structure is as strong as it needs to be. But there are these clues that you'll start to pick up on, these indicators that suggest your website structure could use some dialing in. And one of the most common ones that we see is you're getting questions from your visitors about information that is readily available on your website. If you or your team are getting phone calls or emails from folks in your community asking for information that is published on the website, it's a pretty strong clue that your structure could use some dialing in. And this is a really common issue we hear from nonprofits who we work with. It's just a pretty clear sign that information is there, but folks are not finding it. It's usually the first clue, honestly, but it's not the only one. So another one is if we're seeing high exit rates on the website, that's a strong signal that the site might not be structured as well as it could. Now, exit rate basically just means it's your website's way of telling you that you're losing people from a particular page. The more technical definition is it's the percentage of visitors who left your site from a particular page. And a page's exit rate tells you essentially the percentage of visitors where that particular page was the last one that they viewed before they left. So, if you have 100 visitors to a page and 30 of them leave from that page instead of viewing another one, the exit rate of that page is 30%. 30 out of 100. The thing to keep in mind is it doesn't necessarily tell you why. they left. So it's not this sort of secret objective answer. Some pages you would just expect to have a higher exit rate, like thank you pages generally have a high exit rate because someone has completed an action at that point. Or pages that completely answer someone's question or solve their problem might have a high exit rate. So it's not universally a terrible thing, but high exit rates can help you figure out where people might be giving up on their journey, especially if it's higher than you would expect it to be. With that information, we can sort of start to just see patterns emerging, where maybe visitors' expectations for a page are not being met by what's actually on that page. And if they can't figure out where else to go, or they feel like they're not getting closer to solving their problem, that's when they're more likely to leave. It can help you just root out some dead ends in your visitors' journey. And finally, the last thing we're going to look for are just lower conversion rates than we would like to see. So this is the percentage of visitors who take the key actions that you've identified on your website. And if you joined us a few months ago at Nonprofit Website Office Hours, we talked about conversion rate killers. Then there are lots of reasons you might see low conversion rates, but one of those reasons can be tied to your structure and just kind of how well visitors are able to find what they need in order to take action. Again, folks just want to feel like they're getting closer to solving their problem or answering their question. So if any of these sound familiar, fielding lots of questions, high exit rates, low conversion rates, first of all, know that you're not alone. You're in good company. A lot of amazing nonprofits face these challenges. And then secondly, just take it as your sign to review your website structure for possible improvements. So with that, let's dive into those easy ways that you can improve your website structure. Think of these as just sort of where you should consider starting when you're trying to level up your structure. So first, it sounds obvious, but use clear page names. This is one of the easiest ways to make your structure more effective and helpful for your visitors. Your navigation should make it obvious what visitors will find if they click on a page, but when page names start to reflect your own internal way of speaking about certain programs, for example, or lots of jargon or acronyms that they're not familiar with, it becomes a lot harder for visitors to know where they should go and what to expect when they click. And if visitors can't quickly understand your pages just kind of based on their names and your structure, they're more likely either to choose the wrong, which can be really frustrating, or just kind of give up, chalk it up as too difficult, and ultimately leave your website instead of trying to guess and figure out where they should go. So that's why it's so important to use clear page names that even total strangers who are unfamiliar with your work would be able to understand. But how do you actually do that, right? We all know we should do this, but how? How do we actually do have some recommendations? So first, use plain language your visitors would use in your page titles. Not necessarily what you call things, but what your visitor might think to call it. And to help you do this, ask a couple of questions. I start with these two. So first, if your visitor was describing to someone what they're looking for on your website, how would they describe it? What language would they actually use? And then also, how would they ask the questions that your page addresses? If they were talking to you on the phone, what questions would they be asking? And then use that language in the content of your page, certainly, but also in your page title directly, because that's going to give your visitors the best clues as to what they should expect to find on that page. So here's an example. We've made this one up, but we're not going to roast any website publicly here. But this is honestly not that far off from some examples that we've seen in real life. So the names might be very accurate and true to what we call things, but it's what our team calls them internally, not what visitors would be looking for. A new visitor, they're just not going to really get a whole lot of value out of what these are called, and they clutter up the dropdown. It just makes it look much more visually overwhelming. And we can streamline them in a big way. So you can see here we have Nikki Bartel's Award for Senior Merit and Excellence, David Hartstein Activities After School, Wired Impact Center for Achievement in Computer Science. A lot of room to streamline things. Here's what that looks like when we've streamlined it. See, this becomes senior scholarships, after school programs, computer lab, apply now. They're they're much more streamlined names. And even if they are a little less technically precise, they're much clearer for folks who are new and much easier for them to find what they need. And we can always use the longer, more precise names on the pages themselves, but in your navigation, it's going to benefit you and your visitors to streamline things, simplify things, and use language that they're likely to use. Next, give each page one single name. You want to avoid situations where you're including a slash or a plus sign to combine two names into one. So some common examples we see are things like donate/support us, financials/reports, reports/publications. It might feel like you're being a little bit more like all-encompassing or all-inclusive and more thorough, but it actually muddies the waters for visitors. It just requires more mental energy to figure out what they expect to find on that page, and actually makes it less clear what they will find on the other side of a click, which is generally the exact opposite of what we wanted. Next, avoid acronyms in page titles. This is often sort of another form of internal jargon that less familiar visitors won't understand. Now, we are not saying don't use acronyms at all. Like on the page itself, absolutely use acronyms, especially if you define them first and then use the acronym. I think that can absolutely make a lot of sense. But in the page title, without any additional context, generally acronyms can be a little tricky. There is one major exception to that, and it comes down to knowing your audience really well. So if you're speaking to a very specific audience, and those visitors will know the acronyms and use the acronyms themselves and understand the acronyms, then in some sort of edge cases, it might actually be better to include them. So one example that often comes up for us is rare disease organizations or organizations that are doing a lot of research. A lot of times there are acronyms that may actually be more common than the full scientific name for something. So that could be an example where an acronym actually generally is more helpful for visitors, but as the general rule, you want to avoid acronyms in page titles as sort of your default. And it has the added benefit of oftentimes helping pages show up in search engines and AI answer engines like ChatGPT or Gemini, because that more closely reflects the language that visitors are typing into Google or ChatGPT or whatever they might be using to search for the information that you want to be showing up. And when in doubt, ask an outsider. It's tough sometimes to get out of our own way, and chatting with someone who is not part of your organization can be a game changer here. So in general, we recommend talking to your audience anyway, and a great hack for using clear language that your audience is going to understand is to actually use their language. So, if you're talking with them, if you're interviewing donors or supporters or members of your community, if you can, record those conversations, get them transcribed, and then key in on the language that folks are actually using to describe your work, describe your programs, describe your services, and then fold that language into your content and your page names. All right, next up, streamline your main menu. So your main menu should help visitors quickly scan their options and determine where to go. This is a lot harder to do when it's completely packed with pages. When there's too many items placed in your main navigation or your drop downs are just filled with tons of pages and subpages, visitors are likely to get pretty overwhelmed, and that overwhelm turns into exits, generally speaking. So the more options that you present, the more crowded your site starts to look, and the more mental bandwidth, again, it's going to take visitors to make any sort of decision. If you've been on office hours before, you've probably heard us say something to the effect of everything you add takes attention away from everything that's already there. And that is absolutely true with navigation. Everything you add, people are going to spend a little bit of time looking at, thinking about, processing. And so it's going to take away attention from everything else that is already there. So the point of your navigation is not to get all of your most important pages up there. I want to say that again, because that is actually a common misconception. It is not the job of your navigation to showcase all of your most important pages. Its job is to help visitors find what they need, right? To bring this sense of sort of overarching structure to your website. And so streamlining and simplifying your main menu can help in a big way to that end. So how do we actually do this? First, try to limit your primary navigation to somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 8 items. So we're talking about those pages listed at the top here again in your primary navigation. You're going to want to limit that generally to somewhere in the ballpark of 5 to 8 items. Unfortunately, like there is not a strict rule that applies to all websites here. It depends on your website fonts and layout and the size of your text and the size of your logo and all kinds of styling, but generally you want to stick somewhere around 5 to 8 items in that primary navigation. And we recommend including home in there. Some folks want to pull it out because, if you click on the logo on almost every website now, it takes you home. Usability studies still suggest it's a best practice to keep home in the primary navigation. There are still visitors that don't know to click it, and home base is still really important in most visitor journeys. So we always recommend keeping home in there and counting that as one of the 5 to 8 items that you are including in your primary navigation. Next, you're going to want to tighten up long labels or page titles that take up a lot of space. It's not going to matter how much you've limited your items in your primary navigation. If those page titles are super long, it's still going to feel really crowded. So instead, look for opportunities to tighten up your page titles or labels in your menus. And some of the common opportunities that we see are right here. So you can see it's starting to look pretty crowded in our primary navigation here. We actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 items. If I counted that right. Yep, 7 items. So we're under that 8 threshold, but they're just long, right? And so, for instance, our blog is called News and Updates. Contact Us is in here. It's taking up 10 characters in the primary navigation. Also, you'll see that button in the secondary navigation here. Make a gift to Pioneer Nonprofit. Sometimes organizations are tempted to include their full organizational name in the page title. It clutters things up pretty quickly, adds a lot of length. Plus, folks are already on your website. There's no need to repeat it. There's other brand clues. People can generally get a sense of where they are. So here's a little before and after. Again, here's the before. Here's our after. Toggle between the two. You can see we've just tightened things up a lot here. So News and Updates became news, shortened that up pretty substantially. We moved Contact Us out of the primary navigation, placed it under the Who We Are section, and then Donate to Pioneer Nonprofit became Donate. So everything is still accounted for. Visitors can still find what they need. It's just a lot less crowded, a lot less visually overwhelming. So again, here's that before, here's that after. This after is just much more likely to engage visitors and help them find what they're looking. All right, next up, you're going to want to break up or reorganize overloaded dropdowns. Once you start to reach 7 or 8 pages in a particular dropdown list, it's generally going to become a lot harder for visitors to review them and make a decision. It can also start to present usability challenges on smaller screens. Dropdowns can actually start to extend off of screens at times. So here's actually a really common example we see. So this is an About Us section. You'll see this dropdown has 10 pages, if I counted this correctly. And there's some clear opportunities to streamline things here. So the most common way to tighten up a dropdown that's starting to get lengthy is to consider if any of the pages can be connected under some sort of new umbrella page. So in this example, 5 of the 10 pages are about people, right? We have staff, we have our founder, we have board of directors, we have advisory board, and youth council. So we could create a new page called something like Our Team or Our People and then move those pages to be children of that new page. So here again, we have a little bit before and after. Here's that before, and then here's our after. You can see that the move to create this Our Team page streamlines this dropdown in a big way. And if that's the kind of information that folks are looking for, if our visitors are looking for any of those 5 pages, they're still pretty easily able to find it under this Our Team page. So if we go to the next slide, here's the Our Team page, where we've just used it as this sort of overview of all of the different groups of folks that make up our team, so folks can click through using those calls to action. And then you'll see there's also the sidebar navigation, where people can see the children pages under our team. So we still have staff, our founder, board of directors, advisory board, youth council. They can still easily get there. They can still easily navigate to what they were looking for. Now, creating these new umbrella pages is not always the solution, but it is a really common one. And generally, it's where I recommend folks start if these dropdowns are starting to feel overly crowded. Especially, if you can find some just logical ways to group some pages together in a particular drop. All right. And then finally, don't overlook the power of a blog. If you have one, use your blog to share content whenever it's appropriate. And a very common cause for clutter in menus is that folks feel like they have to add pages for kind of short-term types of things. So we're not talking about, new programs or new initiatives here. We're talking about reminders or alerts, maybe an emergency relief effort that's going to be for only a short period of time, a single event, your latest report, your latest publication. These are all important pieces of information, but they don't necessarily need to be in the main menu just because they're important. Again, the point is not to get the most important pages up there. It's just to bring structure to our visitors' journey in navigating to the most relevant parts of our website. So there is kind of this common misconception that important information can't live on a blog. It should have its own page. We're just here to dispel that myth. That is absolutely not true. There are lots of ways you can effectively route folks to blog posts and still get a lot of traffic to those blog posts. So just don't let importance dictate where content lives on your website. Really find the most logical overall place that information should live. And then if it is a matter of importance, we can think about other distribution channels, other ways to get eyes on that content. It's going to make it far easier for folks to find what they're looking for and help you avoid that situation where you end up with a Franken-site that we talked about at the beginning at some point down the road. Speaking of which, our next tip here is organize content by topic. Honestly, this is probably one of the most helpful mindset shifts for making it your website structure more effective. You're going to want to organize content into logical buckets based on topic. Visitors come to your website looking to solve a problem, right? Or answer a question. And when your website structure doesn't group content together logically, or when it reflects the way your team thinks about content, it becomes really difficult for your visitors to find what they need. And it just adds a lot of friction and confusion to their journey and makes it a lot more likely they're going to abandon your website before engaging. You might think of it like going to a new grocery store. So you walk in expecting to find things grouped by type, right? Produce, bakery, dairy, frozen food. We're just used to certain types of products being grouped together. And that's what generally makes it easy to find. Even if you've never been to that grocery store before, you can still typically find what you're looking for, right? But instead, imagine if you walked into this new store you've never been to and things were organized by brand instead of by type. So, Nestle is over here, Kraft is over here. Like everything is still there. Yeah, Danny, this is nightmare fuel here, right? Like everything is still here. You just can't find what it is you're looking for. You're going to be searching around a lot. You're probably going to be doubling back as you're walking through. I mean, I do that a lot at the grocery store in general, but in general, that's not a best practice, right? We don't want people to have to go back to an aisle they were already in, searching for what they're looking for. This is going to happen because it's just not how your visitors are used to engaging. It's not how we're used to shopping in this store, right? When we go to a grocery store, based on our past experiences, we have expectations, and this one is not particularly helpful unless you're searching for a particular brand. So a lot of website structures honestly end up working pretty similarly to this. Like you have all content is on your website somewhere. But if it's not grouped in a way that your visitors would logically expect to find it, they're going to have a hard time tracking it down, right? Like your structure should help folks who have never heard of you and never been to your website before just as much as it's helping returning visitors who have a lot more context. So, how do you actually pull this off, right? A few specific tips. So, first, you want to think about and group your content into buckets or folders, right? Not by what's most important or not what's for this audience or that audience. As we've said, like the whole point of your website structure is to make it easier for your visitors to find what they're looking for. And it means your main navigation should provide sort of these big buckets or folders that all of the content fit into, right? That way visitors can find what's most important to them, not what you've sort of dictated is most important. And I sometimes find it helpful to think about pages in your primary navigation like drawers in a filing cabinet. Like their main job is to make it easy for visitors to clearly know where to find the information they're after. And then once they're in the right drawer, they can find the right folder, they can open it up and look for a specific file, but they're going to feel that progress. They're going to feel like they're getting closer to the answer to their question or the solution to their problem. And that's really important, keeping people on your website. They feel like they're making progress in their journey. Next up, it's a really good idea to rethink any catch-all pages within those buckets. So what do we mean here? If you think of your navigation like a filing cabinet, a catch-all page is basically your junk drawer, right? It's full of the stuff that you can't bring yourself to get rid of, but you can't find the right home for it in your filing system. Like if you know what's in the drawer, you might find what you need, but you sort of have to know, right? And these pages often are used to collect a bunch of sort of loosely related points outside of their proper context. So I think examples help here. Some of the most common ones that we see, the most common examples of these catch-all pages are frequently asked questions or FAQ pages and gallery pages, just like a collection of photos, videos, things of that nature. They generally become sort of dumping grounds for content that we don't know where to put it. And typically speaking, they're not especially helpful for visitors. They also generally don't get all that much traffic because people don't really know what to expect on those pages. So instead of doing this, what we recommend doing is finding a logical and related home for the content that you're considering putting on these catch-all pages. So instead of one catch-all frequently asked questions page, put those individual frequently asked questions on your program pages, your service pages, whatever sort of the question relates to, put it right on that page, because then it's going to speak directly to the visitor who is engaging with that part of your page. Instead of just someone who's thinking like, I have general questions and might get it on an FAQ page. And then with images, do the same thing. Images, videos, put them directly on the page that they are illustrating. A lot of times this would be, again, programs, services, things of that nature. Instead of having a gallery, event recaps can be a really nice place to put individual galleries of images or videos instead of just a general gallery page that has all the images that you've ever collected. Next, avoid organizing your website by audience. It's a pretty common desire at some point in your website structure journey to at least consider organizing your site by audience. I've been there myself. On the surface, I totally see why most of us end up here at some point. There's a few common issues, though, that typically come up over time if you've tried to organize your site by audience. So the first, and in my opinion, probably the most important, is the interests of your audience are not typically distinct enough for this organizational structure to make sense. Like If you think about it, your donors and your program participants are looking to do very different things on your website, but they're probably both interested in information about your impact, for example. So if you're organizing by audience, often leads to a lot of duplicate content. And then the second piece is your audiences themselves a lot of times are not actually that distinct in practice. So someone may be a member of multiple audiences, right? Like they might be a volunteer, they might be a donor, they might be a client of your services, and asking them to pick only one audience doesn't provide them generally with the best experience. And it also just doesn't generally scale super well. Like there may be some shifting over time in your audiences or how they use your website, and it can be really difficult to adapt the way your site's organized over time if you've organized it by audience. So again, you want to organize by topic, not by audience, even though this temptation is likely to creep in at some point. And finally, the last step here is to use landing pages when you need to for shorter term campaigns or appeals. Now, there may be times that you need to speak directly to a particular audience, right? But maybe you're running a campaign, you need to speak directly to donors, but the main audience for your website is program participants, for instance. This is where a landing page can really come in handy. Rather than spinning up a new section of the site for donors or for this campaign, use landing pages instead. So create a page that speaks directly to this audience. And then when you reach out to that audience, through a distribution channel like email or social media or however you're distributing that campaign, route them to this landing page as the start of their journey. That way you can speak to them. You can provide them with a really solid, compelling initial experience on your website, but you're not sacrificing the rest of your website audience and your website's organizational structure in general for this shorter term appeal. So when you're thinking about the best home for new content, just don't forget about landing pages as an option, especially for these more time bound, shorter campaign. These are often going to exist sort of outside of your main website structure, but can be a really effective engagement tool if you're trying to speak to a specific audience. All right, and then last step, so we have time for Q&A. Promise we'll get through this one quickly. The last step here is to remember to give each page one home in your structure. The whole goal here is to make it as easy as possible for visitors to find what they're looking for. And if you include too many routes to the same information in confusing for visitors. And again, we pretty much always universally want to minimize the way to boost website engagement. This one is pretty quick, pretty easy in practice. The simplest place to start is just making sure that you have assigned a parent page to your pages. Again, assuming that it's not going to be a free-floating landing page. This is a really small kind of behind the scenes step that can make a really big difference. It should be part of every page publishing checklist that you have before publishing a new page on your site. Not only is this going to help your visitors find where they are within your website structure, but it also is going to boost page visibility in the sidebar navigation, since a lot of sidebar navigation is tied to the way that pages, parents, child pages have been set up. So here's an example using our website platform. So you'll see on the left here in page settings, we've chosen the About page as the parent page for our Mission and Vision page here. And then on the right, you can see the Mission and Vision page is safely nestled within the About section of our site, right? It's showing up in the sidebar navigation. It's reflected in the URL structure. That way, visitors are just going to easily be able to get to this page. They're going to know where they are when they land on this page. They're going to get to other sibling pages here in the sidebar navigation easily if they would like to. Now, we just talked about landing pages a minute ago. Those actually often do make sense to be free floating, especially if they're part of a unique campaign. They have a specific audience, right? If you're going to be making a concerted effort to drive traffic to these landing pages through various distribution channels, again, it can make sense not to put them in your navigational sort of your overarching website structure. But generally speaking, you're going to assign a parent page to most pages that you publish, assuming they should be in your website. All right, next, you're going to want to avoid double dipping in your menu. Sometimes we see organizations include the same page in multiple sections of their site or within multiple dropdowns in their navigation. I totally see why this feels helpful. You want to give people more roads leading to a particular page. It often has the opposite effect, though, in practice. So generally, the reason this actually reduces engagement is visitors don't know sort of which path to trust, sort of like which one is the right way to get there. They might also be confused about if these pages are the same or if they're different. And they might click on one expecting it to be different than the one they were on earlier, and they see the same information and things get confusing. Just each page should only be in one dropdown in your primary navigation. If it overlaps, that's totally fine. Just choose the most logical one that you think folks would think to look for it. And related to that, don't forget about building internal links for a clear path. Thoughtfully building links between related pages can lead to huge lifts in website engagement. And it also takes a lot of the pressure off of your website navigation, right? Like we're just showing visitors a logical related page or resource, and we're just substantially increasing the chances that they're going to further engage with our website. So, again, these links just provide that sort of like very clear, easy to follow path for visitors. And they're also really valuable and helpful for search engine to understand what your website is all about and how your content fits together. Search engine optimization is a conversation for another day, but as we've sort of just mentioned here, there's a lot of overlap between best practices that relate to your website navigation, your website structure, and optimizing your website for search engines, for answer engines like ChatGPT or Gemini. So that's it. 4 easy ways to improve your nonprofit's website navigation. So use clear page names, streamline your main menu, organize content by topic, give each page one home in your structure. And if you do those 4 things, you're going to be well on your way to improving your website structure and just making it a whole lot easier for your visitors to ultimately find what they're looking for.